Hi, good afternoon. I hope everybody enjoyed the little bit of a break as we are wrapping up the final session for this afternoon. I am going to speak with you a little bit today about what we have seen on the Well-Being Index and some of the trends that we see through the vast amount of data that we have collected through our Well-Being Index that we do in conjunction with our Gallup partners. I'm also going to talk about engagement at the community and at the work environment level, the work site level, where people live, where they work, and where they play. We've heard a lot today about individual engagement and how critical that is to the success of moving the needle on overall well-being. Equally as critical is getting the leaders, both formal and informal, of communities and work sites engaged in well-being improvement. So let's talk a little bit about the Well-Being Index, how Healthways and Gallup got to this place of measuring the Well-Being Index, and finally, what can we do to start improving people's well-being? Just a little bit of level setting on this first slide. The National Institute of Health tells us that people spend $50 billion every year just on diet pills. They spend an additional $10 billion a year on antidepressants and another $10 billion a year on self-help books. What this tells us is people want to raise their well-being. They want to have a way to be able to engage in improving their emotional health, their social health, their physical health. But the traditional investments that we are making societally just don't seem to be working. We still have high obesity rates, high rates of chronic conditions. People are not engaging in healthy behaviors as they should be. And we're paying the price in terms of economic prices as a country. When we talk about well-being, we talk about measuring well-being, we're really talking about physical and social and emotional health. We also bring in the community. So again, where do people play? Where do they live? What kind of motivators, what kind of things can be gained from the community in order to raise people's well-being? And also their career well-being, their financial well-being. There are a lot of different components to the well-being picture that we try to take into consideration as we look to a measurement tool that will get us to a place of being able to measure. We believe that we cannot truly transform well-being until we have an accurate measurement for it and can see what programs work, what programs do not, and start targeting and tailoring by communities, by work sites within employers in order to get people to higher levels of well-being. And obviously a big component of that is being able to leverage the people within the environments, the experts within the environments, leaders within the environments in order to get people to a place where they have all of the opportunity in the world to make the right decisions and to improve their well-being. The value proposition is really quite simple, but it is something that has got to be said. Again, when we're thinking about engaging work sites, when we're thinking about engaging leaders of employers, and when we think about engaging leaders of the community, we have to make very clear what is the value proposition on the backside. Obviously, everybody wants people to have higher well-being. Individuals want that, employers want that, communities see the need for that, and yet sometimes the value proposition is not fully articulated. We all intuitively know that improved well-being is going to lead to lower health care costs, and we'll show you some data on that in a second. I think that that's pretty intuitive and pretty well accepted nowadays, specifically in the health management industry, but pretty broadly across the spectrum. The other component of the well-being proposition that's probably equally as important, if not more important, is the productivity side. So people who have higher well-being are going to be more productive individuals, whether it's at the employer level, again, at the community level. You see that productivity component, and there's a huge value proposition associated with the productivity component. When we talk about improving well-being, we're really talking about three different aims to improve well-being. The first is targeting people to adopt or maintain their healthy behaviors. So these are your healthy people, and we're looking to make sure that they have all of the right tools and all of the tools necessary to keep on doing the right things and to keep achieving higher levels of well-being. The second is reducing health-related risks. So looking at risk mitigation, whether it's on chronic conditions, whether smoking, BMI risk, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, lots of different points of interaction and different ways to engage on the health-related risks that can be attributed to lifestyle. The third is optimizing care for those who already have chronic conditions. And if you think about it, the health management industry has almost evolved in a completely backwards manner. So we all started out in disease management and then evolved into prevention and then evolved into this greater sense of needing to improve overall well-being. And that's something that the many companies within the health management industry have kind of followed that same trend. And we're very excited to be at a place where now we're not only looking at preventing hospital admits and preventing healthcare costs from increasing, but you also have that huge upside potential that's related to prevention and related to lifestyle risk mitigation. Obviously, again, as people's well-being improves, and we'll see some data that shows this, we have seen that their total medical costs decrease. They decrease on a number of different levels. You have medical costs decreasing, hospital events going down, disease rates and associated costs with disease going down. All of those components are absolutely there. Again, on the flip side, productivity improves in those with higher well-being. So you see things like fewer absences. You see presenteeism being less of an effect on a person's life, and overall workplace productivity continuing to go up. And the increases in productivity, the decreases in healthcare costs lead to some dramatic total economic value, again, for both employers and for communities. As we look across this vast data set that we have, one of the things that we have seen on the healthcare cost side is that for every point that a person's well-being increases, the hospital admits decrease by 2%. So looking across the population, for every point that that population increases, your hospital admissions are going to go down. And this is the data behind the study that shows from left to right the people with lower well-being over to the people with higher well-being, and you see ER visits cut in half, hospital admissions cut in half, and therefore tremendous savings on the healthcare cost side. Additionally, again, at a population level, for every point that increases in overall well-being, you see 1% lower in overall healthcare costs. And we're talking about claims costs, we're talking about medical costs, prescription costs. So you can see the data there that shows these are the dollar amounts, again, by group, that shows the differences that you see in people with lower well-being versus people with higher well-being. As we look at this from a productivity standpoint, our friends and partners at Caterpillar have been very gracious in providing us with some of their productivity data to help us better understand what the productivity impact looks like for higher well-being. So these are just a couple of examples, but Caterpillar has internal key performance indicators that they measure on an annual basis, and these things they have tied directly to business performance. We took that data and matched it up with the well-being assessment results for that organization and found direct correlations to all of these key performance indicators, as well as direct correlations to the overall productivity of the organization, both at the individual level, at the business unit level, aggregated all the way up to the top level of the organization. So when we talk about measuring well-being, the cornerstone of this measurement is the Well-Being Index. The Well-Being Index is a 25-year partnership that we have with our friends and partners over at the Gallup organization. We call about 20,000 people a day in order to get about 1,000 completed surveys each day. And we have over 1.1 million surveys completed to date. These surveys can be used to analyze populations at the national level, at the state level, even the city level, and all the way down to the congressional district level. And we will show you some of those maps and some of that data as we go along. This survey was developed leveraging a lot of industry experts, experts in behavioral economics, experts in psychometrics, experts in a lot of different fields in order to get the constructs for what the Well-Being Index is truly measuring. And we're going to go over those constructs really quickly, again, just to ground everybody in what measurement we're referring to. So life evaluation, this is actually one of the most simple questions of the Well-Being Index, and yet it can yield so much information. This is based on the great work of Hadley Cantrell. And the question is, on a scale of 0 to 10, where would you place yourself on that scale in terms of your overall life? And where would you place yourself in 5 years? This question and this domain is highly influenced by a person's physical health and emotional health, and we know that socioeconomics definitely factors into how a person answers this question. However, we have seen through employers and through communities that with the right culture of health, with the right sustainable engagement, those socioeconomic barriers can absolutely be broken in order to get people to higher levels of well-being regardless of socioeconomic status. On emotional health, we ground people in yesterday, so we ask them to think about the last 24 hours, and we ask them about both positive affect and negative affect. So we're asking them, are you smiling and laughing a lot? Are you experiencing an enjoyment? Are you experiencing happiness? We're also asking about stress, worry, anger, sadness. This is also where we get diagnosed depression, which can be a key disparity driver in overall emotional health as well as well-being. In physical health, we've taken this domain a bit further to go beyond the traditional measurements that you will see in physical health. So while we have all of the chronic conditions in this measurement, we have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, asthma, and so on and so forth, we're also getting the daily affect associated with a person's physical health. So are you feeling well rested each day? Do you have enough energy to get things done each day? And do your health problems prevent you from your normal or usual activities? Getting that kind of information can help us better understand where we need to meet the person in terms of managing chronic disease, managing lifestyle risks, and also what are additional barriers that might be flowing into other domains such as emotional health and healthy behaviors. In physical health, that's also where we get our BMI measurement and are able to look at BMI risk across populations. Healthy behaviors, we're looking at smoking, healthy eating, fruit and vegetable intake, and regular exercise. Work environment, also 4 questions, and these questions are heavily influenced by our partners at Gallup who have done tremendous work in the Q12 arena and in the engagement survey arena and understanding what are the true drivers of a person's work environment that will make or break the work environment for the individual and therefore will either be a contributing factor to their well-being in a positive way or in a negative way. Work environment is one of the keys in overall well-being. So 4 questions. Are you satisfied with your job? Do you get to use your strengths to do what you do every day? Do you have a supervisor who always creates a trusting work environment? And does your boss treat you more like he or she is your boss or partner? And that speaks to collaborative supervision, which is a key component of the overall work environment and one of the components that we have seen decline gradually over the past 3 years since we have been measuring work environment and overall well-being. Finally, basic access. This is our community measurement. This one, again, this is one of those bottom rung of Maslow's hierarchy basic needs type of domains. Without basic access being met, it is going to be much more difficult to engage an individual in programs that will improve their well-being. So this is where we measure not only community satisfaction, whether or not your community is progressing as a place to live, but also things like, do you have enough money to afford food and housing and health care, which are critical components. We also ask things like, do you have do you have access to a safe place to exercise, as well as access to fresh fruits and vegetables? When you look at the Well-Being Index by state, just to ground you on all of these maps, and you can find all of the state reports out on wellbeingindex.com. When you look at these by state, we do quintiling across the states, the cities, and the congressional districts. So the first quintile is in green, the second quintile is in blue, the third in yellow, the fourth in orange, and the fifth in red. I won't spend too much time going into this information. There is so much data in all of these data sets by state and by city and by congressional district, but you see some very distinct trends in the states with the highest well-being versus the states with the lowest well-being. Hawaii, Utah, Colorado, all states at the top of the Well-Being Index. Mississippi, West Virginia, Arkansas are at the lower end of the Well-Being Index, and you'll notice that most states are touching each other in quintiles, and there's definitely effect in both regional areas of the country as well as the overall water borders that we have. One of the things that we know from our research in the Well-Being Index is that living on water definitely improves the odds of having higher well-being. At the city level, we measure 188 cities representing 75% of the population. Cities at the top of the index in 2010, Lincoln, Nebraska, Boulder, Colorado, Santa Rosa, California. Cities at the bottom of the index, generally the tops and the bottoms are pretty stable. You see the same cities playing at the tops and the bottom every year that we have measured. At the bottom, we have places like Huntington, West Virginia, Fort Smith, Arkansas, and even cities in California, which does very well overall as a state in terms of well-being. We see cities like Redding and Chico with much lower well-being than some of the other areas that are on the water. And finally, on congressional districts, this really gives us a segmentation power in the data that is unparalleled. We can take a city, break the city down into congressional districts, and get so much rich data at the community level. And this is really where change is inspired. This is where engagement happens. This is where both leaders and members of the community really start to understand the metrics and start to understand what can be done within their community in order to improve overall well-being. Every community is different. There is no single prescription for improving well-being. At the community level, at the worksite level, there are lots of different targeting and tailoring initiatives that have to go on in order to get well-being improvement initiatives that truly work. The data gives you that information in order to see what you need to do to improve well-being. One of the things that we have done after 3 years of having data and having some good trend data now, we can tell based on what we see in the data and in those top communities at the Well-Being Index, we can tell some pretty common characteristics of those cities at the top. So while some are probably not shocking, cities at the top of the Well-Being Index are generally going to have fewer smokers, mainly because of smoking policies that have been put in place at the community level. They are going to have lower rates of obesity and lower rates of chronic conditions such as high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. Some things are not as intuitive, though. As you look through emotional health, one of the things that we measure is, are you learning or doing interesting things every day? And those communities at the top of the Well-Being Index, and we see the same thing in organizations, those communities have high rates of people engaged in new activities, learning new things on a daily basis. We also see lower rates of clinical depression in those communities with higher well-being. And finally, having a safe place to exercise can be critical in, again, communities and work sites well-being index measurements. So being able to provide people in a community with walking paths, with sidewalks, with biking trails, being able to provide people at an employer with the option of going and getting some exercise during their workday, very important. When we look across creating sustainable engagement and creating sustainable change in employers and in communities, we realize that the value that you will achieve from these kind of initiatives aimed at well-being improvement increases the more you align. So starting with the individual, who is the cornerstone of well-being improvement and the success in well-being initiatives, and leveraging the individual's environments. So looking at the individual, and again, those areas where they work, where they live, and where they play, and making sure that the work sites are aligned with individual well-being objectives. There are a lot of different components of creating that culture of health that is conducive to well-being improvement. Again, things like offering people healthy eating alternatives at the workplace, managing operational execution and operational metrics with the ability of getting people out to exercise during their workdays. Manufacturing environments have this challenge on a consistent basis, and it's something where you have to manage the operational tactics of getting the widgets out the door with managing the expectations with the employees that well-being initiatives are an important part of life at that employer and are going to be treated as such. And then finally, the highest level of value and the highest point of sustainable engagement comes when you align all three. When you align the individual, you align the work site, and you align the community. When we look at the work environment, the traditional approach to the work environment has been basically that people are going to make independent and rational choices, and that they can overcome their social and environmental components of their overall well-being in order to make those choices. As many behavioral economists have told us, and as some of the work that you've seen earlier here today suggests, we have to create those environments. We have to ensure that we are creating sustainable environments that are conducive to higher well-being, both at the work site and at the community. One of the most fascinating initiatives that we have started the process of in the last year and a half has been looking at communities and trying to understand how to create that sustainable engagement at the community level. We started by engaging Dan Buettner, who has done some amazing work on the blue zones. If any of you have not seen that book is available, and it is truly fascinating. These blue zones that Dan Buettner identified are places throughout the world where people are living the longest with the highest quality of life. So this is not necessarily synonymous with happiness, although people there are generally very happy in these blue zones. And it's not necessarily synonymous with having the best healthy behaviors, although people do have great healthy behaviors in these areas. It is not because it's a forced component of life. It's because it's the way the communities are set up, and it is a way of life. So things like in the blue zones Power 9 principles, moving naturally, having access and eating lots of green stuff, lots of nuts, plant and nut-based diets. Wine at 5 is another component of the Blue Zones communities. All of these different components we took and we said, well, so the community framework really looks like leveraging the community with those Power 9, those Blue Zones principles in order to create environments where people want to make the right decision, and where the right decision is easy. It's just a way of life. This was first prototyped in Albert Lea, Minnesota. The results are tremendous. They created walking school buses where all the children in the community would get together with their parents every morning and walk to school, therefore creating natural movement. They did not undertake a bunch of marathons. It was, again, just making the right choice more available to people. And through that work, we've also leveraged some of the med networks information that you saw earlier on social networking, as well as the well-being index information, in order to see where the targeting and tailoring needs to happen at the community level, and starting to gauge those community initiatives by how successful they are based on what the well-being index data is showing us. So to wrap this all up, and then I'll take some questions, probably the key component in all of this, in creating sustainable engagement at the community level and at the worksite level, is in the leadership. Leadership can be formal or informal. As we heard from the discussions around social networking, this is not necessarily elected or appointed leaders. Those nodes within the social networks can be critical in how successful these initiatives are. So creating a plan that helps you understand where the targeting, tailoring needs to happen within your community and within your work sites, and using data in order to get to that plan. Whether it's the well-being index measurement, culture of health measurements, there are a lot of different components that can be taken into consideration as you create that plan. That will lead to behavior change. That will lead to those improved well-being components that we talked about, and therefore the economic value being realized at all different components across the process. I have enjoyed speaking with you guys. I'm going to take a couple of questions now. Let's see. Great data, how can we use it is the first question. And great question. So it depends on what kind of setting you're using it in. I think that the primary point of the data, from an employer perspective, I guess let's start there. The data can be used as pre and post measurements for well-being transformation programs, starting at that point. They can also be used to segment a business by business unit, by work site, by work group, by job class, whatever is the most meaningful segmentation of your business and wherever the most change happens within the organization, that is where the data efforts should be targeted to. In larger organizations, global policies are excellent and provide a lot of good information and a lot of good programs for people. However, what we have seen in most organizations is that well-being improvement efforts need to be targeted and tailored at a lower level than the global level in order to start creating real sustainable change. The second question, is this data available? Absolutely. And yes, that was the end of the question, sorry. Absolutely. So start with www.well-beingindex.com, and you will see some all of the state reports are available out there. You will see the states, the cities, and the congressional districts ranked on all of those items that we use to measure well-being. And from there, we do a lot of research projects with a lot of great universities, organizations. We have engaged with the CDC and a bunch of different other groups in order to continue mining this data and continue finding the best insights and the most relevant insights to well-being improvement. The second question, have you found a link between work, environment, and physical health? We have seen some links. Those links primarily come in a little bit of a circular form. So what we have seen in work environment, the two critical the elements within work environment, job satisfaction and strength utilization. Being satisfied with your job and getting to use your strengths every day can make it or break it in terms of the way you feel about the rest of the domains of overall well-being. When those things are not there, and other components of work environment too, generally that bleeds over into emotional health, and you see stress, you see worry, you see all of those elevate, and those are what tend to bleed over in feeling well rested, having sufficient energy, which are directly correlated with your productivity. That's an excellent question. Let's see, can well-being be tied to cost, productivity, etc.? Most definitely. One of the studies that we have done shows that life evaluation domain that I was telling you all about earlier, life evaluation can be a predictor of your healthcare costs. So people who place themselves at the lower end of that ladder are spending on average 50% more than the industry average for the organization. People who place themselves on the top of the ladder are spending about 20% less in healthcare costs than those folks in the middle. So it absolutely can be tied to healthcare costs. On the productivity component, we see direct correlations, and they might even be stronger than the healthcare cost component. We see direct correlations with overall well-being, productivity at the individual level, productivity at the business unit level, business unit performance even. So those ties are absolutely there. So thank you all for having me. I'm going to turn it back over to Joe Coughlin to give us some final thoughts and conclusions.